I suppose I'll just say it out loud since I'm not even sure where to begin. My name is Mallory. I'm 34 years old, and yesterday I made a foolish, thoughtless mistake that nearly destroyed my entire life. Let's just say that my husband, Carl, isn't exactly pleased with me at the moment, albeit perhaps it hasn't been completely destroyed yet. He hasn't exactly been flawless lately either, but we'll talk about it later. It all started because I was venting. All right, I was tirading. Let's face it, everyone needs to vent, particularly when your spouse has become a cranky, uninteresting jerk who no longer even makes an effort. I'm free to feel something about that. So there I was, seated on the couch with Lindsay and Tara, my two closest friends. I must admit that I felt fantastic loose, a little drunk, and not holding back by the time we finished a bottle of wine. Isn't that the purpose of friends? I was telling them how much Carl had gotten away with. Have you seen him recently, really? I said, swishing my glass as though I were a movie star. He now has a large stomach, as if he were carrying a keg or something, not to mention his hairline, which resembles an army on the run. He's farther back each time I glance at him. They chuckled, and I did too, since it was to speak aloud. At least he has a job, though, right? Tara added, my ex couldn't even hold one down. Sure, I answered, rolling my eyes. But what's the point if he spends every night on the couch, watching reruns of Pawn Stars? He's like a living stereotype. I was kidding, but there was a hint of bitterness in my tone. Before it began to leak out like that, I had no idea how much resentment I had been suppressing. Then I continued, Carl used to be so much more. I don't know, handsome and ambitious. I began to say he would take me out on dates, give me small presents as surprises, and make me feel special when we first got married. The only thing that shocks me these days is how much takeout he can eat in one sitting, and he hardly notices if I'm wearing something new. Then I made the statement that still makes me shudder. Honestly, if someone else appeared who truly showed me that I was important, I might. I heard it then, a small, thin voice yelling my name, Mallory, Mallory, are you there? I paused to take in the situation. My stomach fell when I glanced at my phone. On the screen appeared Carl's name. He had been eavesdropping the entire. I muttered, oh my God, and frantically hung up. But my buddies gaped at me as if they were in shock over what had just transpired. And to be honest, I was too. I just sat there frozen for a moment. I had a million ideas running through my head at once. Did he hear it all? Did he continue to listen? What was my next course of action? Try to explain and give him a call back, act as if it never occurred. A new life with a false identity and throw my phone into the closest lake? It was me, Tara, who spoke first. My voice was tremulous as I answered, I don't know, Mallory, did he just hear all of that? He repeated my name. I think so. I mean, he must have. Right? Lindy gave a head shake. The statement, girl, you're in trouble, was accurate. I finally plucked up the courage to phone him back after a few minutes of terrified quiet. To be honest, I felt worse when he didn't respond. He must have heard enough to realize that I was disparaging him. If he was upset enough to disregard me, how much, though, did he actually hear? Did he hear me joke that I was going to leave him for someone better? As I attempted to piece it together, my stomach rumbled. I then began attempting to defend it to myself. Since I'm me, was I really so mistaken? After all, it's possible that I shouldn't have spoken those words aloud. But they were true, right? Carl is no longer the same person. It's not as if I was fabricating or lying to be mean. I was only letting off steam and venting. That's what everyone does, right? However, my pals weren't the only ones who heard it this time. I was so anxious by the time I managed to call Carl later. That evening, I felt like I might puke, and my hands were shaking. His voice was icy when he spoke, and I could tell immediately that this would not be a simple talk. Mallory, he interrupted before I could even greet him. I swallowed hard and added, I heard what you said. His remark struck me like a kick to the gut. Carl, I don't even try to explain it. I heard everything, all of it. Is it possible that he heard me say that I detested him? That bit when I made a joke about finding another person, I shouted out, I wasn't serious. In an attempt to correct it, he chuckled, but it wasn't a joyful laugh. I was just venting. You know how I get when I'm with the girls. I didn't mean any of it. It was hurtful and bitter. I was at a loss for words. You didn't mean any of it. Really? So you don't think I'm ugly or fat or lazy? To be honest, I had intended some of it, but words. Perhaps not all of it, and perhaps not in the harsh manner it was spoken. But beneath the anger and exaggerations fueled by wine, the truth was there naturally, though I couldn't tell Carl that outright. I said, "Carl, I was just frustrated." With a slight quiver in my voice, I didn't want to come across as contrite. Even if my pride was on the verge of crumbling, it was still there. The wait was too long. I've been feeling overwhelmed and I said some things I shouldn't have. It wasn't fair. And I'm sorry. I felt as though I was being choked by the silence. I could hear his steady but heavy breathing over the phone. And I could see him pacing the living room. His face contorted in the way he often did when he was trying to remain composed, but was truly unhappy. "That's your excuse. You're overwhelmed, so you tell your friends you hate me, fat and ugly?" "That you might," he eventually concluded, his voice brimming with incredulity. "That's how you deal with feeling overwhelmed, leaving me for someone else." I started to reply, but he continued, his voice growing louder by the second. "Mallory, are you even aware of how that feels? To hear your wife, my wife, speak of me in such a way, as if I were some repulsive burden she must endure?" It was me now, pacing the kitchen floor back and forth, barefoot, and twitching the hem of my hoodie. I detested the fact that I could feel the panic rising in my chest, even though I knew I was the evil person. I detested feeling that way. I detested the fact that he had heard it at all, though. This conversation wouldn't even be happening if my phone hadn't lied to me. "Carl," I began anew, trying to sound composed and sensible. "I'm aware that what I said was incorrect. I was letting my hair down. All I wanted to do was get things off my chest. I certainly didn't want to hurt you, and I didn't mean for you to hear it. However you did," he said sternly. "The saddest part, Mallory, is that I don't even think you care that you injured me." I didn't want to admit how much that hurt. "That's not true," I responded, raising my voice to defend myself. "I care, of course. Why do you suppose I'm attempting to resolve at this moment? I wouldn't even bother to explain myself if I didn't care." I could see him shaking his head as he laughed bitterly again. "You're just making excuses. You're not giving an explanation. Furthermore, I don't believe there is anything you can say to resolve this." For a brief minute, I experienced what felt like genuine regret as the word struck me like a slap. However, it rapidly turned into rage since, after all, wasn't he also a part of the issue? I had said some awful things, to be sure, but they weren't unexpected. Perhaps I wouldn't have felt the need to vent in the first place if he had been more focused and present. Before I could stop myself, I sprang back. "You're acting like I'm the only one who's ever done anything wrong in this marriage. But Carl, let's not act like you're some ideal husband. You've fallen behind. I feel like I'm living with a roommate rather than a partner half the time. And you hardly ever talk to me anymore." I realized it was a mistake as soon as I said it. His abrupt quiet felt heavier and colder, and I could hear it in the rapid intake of breath on the other end of the line. Finally, in a faint but lethal voice, he whispered, "Wow, you don't understand, do you? What am I missing?" I became defensive and snapped, "That I'm not content, that I'm sick of being overlooked and undervalued." "Carl, I apologize if the truth offends you, but rather than blaming me for everything, perhaps you might consider why I feel this way." I was aware that it was a low blow, but I felt somewhat justified since, while I had made a huge mistake, wasn't he at least partially to blame for how badly things had become between us? He had given up trying first, didn't he? Neither of us spoke for a long time. The hush lingered, heavy and intolerable. The corners of my eyeballs were prickling with tears. I had no idea why I was crying. Was it fear, frustration, or guilt? Perhaps everything at once. Carl's voice was calmer when he eventually spoke again, but that didn't help my mood. It made me feel worse. "If anything, I'm not going to argue with you, Mallory," he replied. "I'm too for that, but I'll tell you this, you can blame me all you want, but nothing excuses what you said tonight, nothing." And he ended the conversation. For a long time, I stood there looking at the phone in my palm, the call log still visible on the screen. I was numb, but beneath that numbness was something else. Perhaps a glimmer of contempt or anger, because, in addition to my hatred of myself for what I had said, I also had some resentment toward him for listening to it and for giving me the impression that I was solely responsible for everything. Carl wasn't home by the time I went to bed. My mind was racing with all that had transpired as I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. I began to question whether we would survive at all. For the first time, however, didn't he make that choice I had been left dangling by him. It was he who refused to acknowledge his role in this whole situation. Was I really to blame if he couldn't take a little honesty? Carl had not returned home by the following morning. I couldn't tell if the knot in my stomach was due to guilt, or simply the fear of dealing with the aftermath because the side of the bed was cool and undisturbed. A part of me wanted to text him to apologize briefly and see if that would be enough to make things better, however, until he admitted his role in this disaster as well. A stubborn part of me believed that I shouldn't have to. After forcing myself to get out of bed, I made coffee, took a shower, and put on makeup in preparation for the day. I felt like I was wading through molasses, and every small activity felt heavier than it should have. I kept mentally reliving our disagreement, scrutinizing every word, every pause, and every quiet moment. And no matter how I twisted it, I was unable to determine if I was the scapegoat or the antagonist in this tale. My phone buzzed by the time I took a seat at the kitchen table with my coffee. My heart leaped for a moment, thinking it might be Carl. But it turned out to be Tara's SMS. "Tara, are you okay? Did he come home?" Unsure of how to react, I gazed at the screen. Was I all right? Not at all. Has he returned home? Of course not. It was a lie. And I detested how simple it was to type, so I sent back something ambiguous. We talked. It was rough, but I think we'll figure it out, however. Acknowledging that felt like a defeat. However, I wasn't prepared for anyone else, especially Tara, to comment on what had transpired just yet. She had good intentions, but she had a way of making things dramatic. And I didn't need any more of that. I kept myself occupied with tasks I had been putting off for weeks, including cleaning the closet and scrubbing the bathroom tiles. As the hours passed slowly, anything to distract me from Carl and his thoughts, where he may be, and whether he was returning, like cleaning out the kitchen's bulging junk drawer. But despite my best efforts to divert my attention, the thoughts continued to surface. Was he sitting somewhere in his car? Was he ranting about me at a friend's house the same way I had been ranting about him, or worse? Was he flirting with a woman who didn't call him ugly and overweight behind his back, while drinking whiskey to hide his rage at a bar? I was surprised by how strongly that final concept struck me. My chest constricted at the thought of Carl being with someone else, even if just briefly and pointlessly. Carl wasn't the something I had been avoiding. I was afraid of losing him. The idea of him leaving permanently was intolerable. Despite all of my complaints, outbursts, and nitpicking, I couldn't stand the silence any longer. By mid-afternoon, I took out my phone and texted him, "Can we talk?" After a few minutes, an hour went by with no reply. Even though I knew he wouldn't answer right away, I couldn't stop checking my phone. Carl was not the type to jump right in, especially when it came to emotional discussions. He preferred to deliberate and take his time. It was one of the things about him that used to irritate me. But now I found myself wanting him to just call me and yell at me if he had to. At last, when the sun began to set, my phone began to buzz. In my haste to get it, I almost dropped it. "I'll be home tonight. We can talk then." Although I felt instant relief, it was fleeting because I now had to confront him and didn't know what to say. Later that evening, I was waiting for Carl in the living room when he came in. He appeared more worn out than I had ever seen him. He placed his keys on the counter, his face drawn, his shoulders bowed, and he avoided eye contact. I felt sick to my stomach when I saw him like that. The words stuck in my throat. Even though I wanted to say something to diffuse the atmosphere, at last he said something. "Let's just get this over with." I nodded and motioned for him to sit. Though it wasn't quite the cordial introduction I had hoped for, he didn't. Rather, he stood with his arms folded, staring down at me with a face that I couldn't quite read. Disappointment, rage, hurt, or perhaps all of these at once. I swallowed hard as he stated, "I've been thinking," in a calm but forceful voice. "And I need to know one thing before we go any further, okay?" His voice cracked slightly at the final syllable. "Do you really hate me, Mallory?" For once, I didn't have a quick response to the question, which hung in the air oppressively. Because, no, I didn't hate him. Rather, I loathed the aspects of him that made me feel unimportant, disregarded, and overlooked. And I detested how those emotions had rotted and festered inside of me into bitterness that erupted in the worst manner. "No," I eventually answered, hardly raising my voice above a whisper. "Carl, I don't hate you. I promise I don't. However, I've been dissatisfied, so I chose the easy route rather than discussing it with you. I said some terrible things I didn't intend when I complained. To my buddies, I really apologize for it. I could see the wheels moving in his thoughts as he looked at me for a long time. He was considering what I had to say, attempting to determine whether it was sufficient or not. Finally, he responded, I appreciate your apology, but it doesn't change what you said, and it doesn't change how I feel on this particular day. In a hurry to keep him talking, I answered, I know, but Carl, I want to make this right, I do. All I want is that you meet me halfway. He scowled, and I could tell that annoyed him. Will I meet you halfway? He said it again after everything you said about me, Mallory. Do you even understand what you're requesting? I knew Carl wasn't mistaken, and his words lingered in the air like a challenge. After everything I'd said about him, it probably sounded absurd to ask him to meet me halfway. What was I to do, though? Grovel at his feet and accept all the blame? I wasn't that person. Had I not apologized, the fact that I had acknowledged my mistake should be a factor in an attempt to calm myself. I inhaled deeply. Carl, I'm aware that I hurt you and that I can't take that back. However, I'm attempting to be truthful here. We haven't been getting along well for a time, and perhaps I handled that poorly, but we both need to work on this. I can't do it by myself. I could see the turmoil in his eyes, yet his countenance remained unsoftened. I could tell he was not quite ready to let go of his anger, but he wanted to believe me. Put some effort into it. His tone was almost sarcastic. After everything you stated, do you really believe we can just work on this? You tell your pals that I'm lazy and overweight. His jaw tensed as he interrupted himself. I'm not even sure if I can still look at you the same way. That hurt more than I cared to acknowledge, but I felt myself becoming irritated rather than giving in. I exclaimed, my voice rougher than I meant to. Oh, come on, Carl. You behave as though I've committed some awful offense. You're not entirely innocent in this situation, even though I did say some terrible things. For years, you have allowed this marriage to deteriorate. Long before I did, you gave up trying. I could see the anger rising in him once more as his eyes expanded. Once more, he yelled, don't even try to put on me, even if I'm not flawless. I didn't sit around disparaging you in front of my pals, Mallory. I didn't express my hatred for you to them or consider moving on to someone else. I felt like I was punched in the stomach by that last section. I was unaware that he had overheard that portion of the talk, and now it was impossible to avoid it. I was unable to look him in the eyes for a second as my face reddened. I said faintly, I wasn't serious. It was merely a careless remark. Actually, I wasn't going to. He interrupted me. But it doesn't matter. The fact that you even entertained the idea, his words, everything I need to know, left me speechless. I knew in my heart that he was correct, so for a second I was at a loss for words. The fact that I had considered it at all, even if it had only been a passing idea or I hadn't been serious, spoke a lot about where I was as a person and where we were as a couple. However, I wasn't yet prepared to give up. I said, Carl, I know I've made mistakes, in a softer tone, big ones, and I know I've hurt you. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want us to end like this. His face was unreadable as he shook his head. I don't know if that's enough anymore, Mallory. I don't know if I can trust you or if I even want to try. For a brief minute, I felt tears welling up in my eyes as the words hit me like a slap. But I blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of him. My voice was shaking as I asked, so that's it? You're just going to give up on us after everything we've been through? With a groan, he combed through his hair. He said, I don't know what I'm going to do. But I need time, Mallory. I need space to figure out if it's even worth saving. I wanted to grab him, embrace him, and implore him not to go, but I refrained from doing so because of the finality in his voice. I was halted by something in his face, the way his shoulders slumped and his refusal to look me in the eyes. I realized that no amount of begging would make up for the deep hurt he was feeling at the moment. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Okay, I muttered, take all the time you need. But please just don't give up on us completely. He didn't answer. I was left alone in the quiet of our too large, too empty house as he instead picked up his keys and left. I spent what seemed like hours sitting there, mentally reliving the exchange. And although I really wanted to blame him for his lack of emotional support, his distance, and his letting go, I couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, I was mostly to blame for this. Still, another part of me resisted letting go of my pride as I sat there struggling with my anxiety and guilt, because acknowledging that I was wrong, truly wrong, meant confronting aspects of myself that I wasn't prepared to face, such as my impatience, selfishness, and lack of responsibility. And losing Carl wasn't as frightening as that. The house was too quiet, and I felt completely alone for the first time in a long time.